for this seminar series is Distinguished Women Researchers in the Built Environment. And indeed, today we have one of a distinguished member of this community, Professor Suzanne Wilkinson. So let me give a brief introduction to her achievements thus far. Professor Wilkinson is a professor of construction management in the School for Built Environment at Massey University. And she's also Associate Dean for Research for College of Science at Massey. She has a PhD in construction management and a bachelor's honors in civil engineering, both from Oxford Brookes University, and a graduate diploma in business studies in dispute resolution from Massey University. Suzanne's research focuses on resilience, disaster management, construction innovation, and smart cities. She is interested in how cities, communities, and organizations plan for disasters and manage hazard events, and has a particular interest in how cities, communities, and organizations rebuild and recover. Professor Wilkinson has been advisor to organizations on resilience building and disaster recovery, most recently including Auckland Council, government agencies in New Zealand, and Hunter Water in Australia. Suzanne has been principal investigator and research leader on many projects, including a recent 5-year, $10 million New Zealand project, where she is the program lead on building capacity and capability for construction sector, and a recently completed $4 million principal investigator for the urban theme in the National Science Challenge, Resilience to Nature's Challenges. She has published over 300 research papers and co-written 3 books, and most recently co-authored book being Resilient Post-Disaster Recovery Through Building Back Better. That's published by Routledge in 2019. She wrote this book with colleagues Sandeeka, Mannakkara, and Regan, Potangaroa. Sorry, Regan, I apologize for that. Suzanne is a keen PhD supervisor and has now supervised to completion over 40 PhD students. So with that said, please welcome Professor Suzanne Wilkinson. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Just check, you can see my screen, just the title of the...
Yes, we can.
On the screen, yeah. Okay, then. So hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Mark and Cole, for inviting me to this prestigious seminar series. Thrilled to be here. It's actually 5:30 in the morning in New Zealand, so got up especially early to talk to you, and hopefully you'll hear a little bit about my career. So what am I going to talk about? I think I'm going to talk about the highs and lows of a career in construction management. What would I do differently if I was starting up again? So there might be people in the audience thinking about an academic career or a business career or where to go next. I think I'm also going to talk about what I see as important research. So I'll talk about the research that I do and the work that I consider particularly important. And then I'm going to touch on what I've experienced as a woman professor in construction, or a woman in construction throughout my academic career. And it's mixed up, so you'll see different slides have a different flavour. So as we go through, you'll see different things. A little bit about me. I'm not a New Zealander. I don't have a New Zealand accent. I actually have a London accent. I'm from London and was brought up in London until I went to university. And I think, like a typical female child trying to decide what to do, I had a lot of choices, and I think those choices came down to history or engineering. I was really good at history, but I was lucky enough to have a physics teacher who said, I think engineering is going to be good for you. I don't think I was really well informed at the time, and I did love history, and I kept up history. I stayed right till the end of my sixth form studying history to keep my options open. But civil engineering won out. And I think I wasn't particularly well informed, and I think this is very common. I chose civil engineering for these 3 things. Primarily, number 3, it would lead to a job. And I didn't quite know what history would lead to other than a history teacher. I really like skyscrapers and tall buildings, so I thought I would build skyscrapers. So I wanted to build things, and I thought, hey, I could build skyscrapers. Actually, there weren't that many skyscraper buildings going on in and around Britain at the time. That subsequently came in the 90s after I'd left UK, when they massively built up London in particular into skyscrapers. So I kind of missed my opportunity there. But I thought also I like to be outside, so I like to work outside. I wasn't well informed about civil engineering at all. I had no idea, really. I didn't know the whole breadth of civil engineering. And I'm not sure I needed to know that, but I think I wasn't well informed. And at the time there was limited internet. So you're talking about a time when there was no or limited internet. So what you had to find out things by going to this weird thing called the library. What was it like being a woman in construction and engineering in the late 80s and early 90s? I think I could kind of boil it down to these three things. There was underrepresentation. I was in a class of 3 women, and we had about 60 men in the class. So that was the kind of ratio when I was doing civil engineering. The opportunities and access, I think, were the main barrier at the time. I was lucky I had a physics teacher who said, engineering will be really good for you. There were other women in my class who had a father who said it was really good for you, or they were following in their footsteps of somebody who had given them some access into engineering. And that still remains quite a common access route for women going into construction and engineering. But I think we've broadened our views much more. And then there just were no women around really in engineering and construction, very few, no role models. I didn't have any women lecturers. There were some women in psychology and the arts faculty, but there were just no role models that you could kind of go, well, what's the career going to be? So you kind of a little bit on your own, but you make friends anyway, irrespective of male, female, any gender. You just make friends with people, and we were a really good cohort in that year. My degree had 18 months out, so I went into industry, and I went onto a construction site. Just a little bit about construction sites at the time. The one you'll see is not a 1980s construction site. However, it does represent a 1980s construction site. So it's a fairly recent one, but it does look quite similar. So we had one computer and nobody knew how to use it. So it was basically sat in the corner. We hand wrote everything. We hand wrote reports. We hand wrote notes on site. We would file those. We would give them to a receptionist, and they would type out the important ones. There were no mobile phones, so imagine that you're on site and something happens. You have to run to get the kit. You can't assemble people very quickly. Cameras were cameras, so we took a lot of photos. So we had to take photos of connections, but there was no tagging those two parts of the building through a BIM model or anything like that. Basically, you just took photos. They then got processed. You then wrote on those photos what they were. Very much the beginnings of email internet, but not on this site because we only had one computer that nobody used. Somebody said they used it, and some used to spend a bit of time on it, but I have no idea what they were doing because I don't think it was really connected. And at the time, architects were really important. So I was on a site where the architect's coming, and I think that's quite a shift now. And the architect would come along and would be doing things like checking all our documentation, walking around site, but we cleaned up the site, we got prepared for the architect's visit. They never visited just as an architect, never just showed up. There was always, this big intake of breath and the architect's visiting, and we would get ready for this royal visit. So I felt that, probably I should have gone into architecture because they were getting all the praise. Machinery was much the same at the time. So you'll see this site, with cranes and diggers and trucks, much the same. Delivery systems, supply chain type activity without the digital overlay. So I think there was fairly similar in the ways of construction. We weren't doing modern methods of construction, which I think has moved on, but essentially we were building as we would build now. And the thing about being female in a male-dominated world, I think it was quite confronting. There's the only female on site, the only female had ever been on site, that a lot of people had seen, and just low-level confronting behaviour around, what are you doing here? Is this the right place for you? Not quite sure you could, you're given instructions, but they weren't quite sure they could take instructions from you. This is kind of low level, but the higher level stuff was really around the office had total nude calendars of women. So that was a bit shocking, which I did ask as I asked for them to be removed, and they didn't get removed. And so basically what happened subsequently was I got them removed through head office, and that was an unpopular move for me on the construction site. Those sorts of things I think were kind of more of the higher level things which you wouldn't see now, but the lower level stuff I think there's still an undertone of, what are you doing here? What makes a difference is actually having a critical mass on the site. So if you have 2 or 3 or 4 women on the site, they're much better than having 1 woman on the site. And I still think that's probably true. So I completed my PhD in the early 90s, and I kind of thought, what am I going to do next? And the industry was quite buoyant at the time. So I thought, well, and I was being offered a PhD scholarship, and I was being offered a PhD at the same institution. I was quite happy to do that, but I wasn't quite sure. So this is how I made a decision. I loved being a student, so there's a positive there. I thought the lifestyle was great. I could do what I wanted. It was sold to me as, go away and explore. I think you'll enjoy this, and got 3 years of being a student again. You can explore what you like, and I really liked that. So I liked the student lifestyle. I liked being a student, but I think the number one thing was my partner was doing a PhD. And that meant that we collectively, as a couple, could still live the lifestyle we had been living as students. So we met as students and we're still together. So that was probably a good choice. But I think I missed other things. I think when I was weighing it up, because it was a very, very close decision for me, as whether to kind of go into a consultancy company. I really like geotechnical engineering. And I thought, well, there's an alternative choice. But I think doing the degree, it was quite a hard choice for me. Doing a PhD was quite a hard choice for me. But I think in the end, the lifestyle side of that and another kind of 3 years of doing what I wanted to do really kind of won out there. So just thinking about what I'd do differently. So I think during my PhD, I would make more connections with industry. I think that's one of the big things that makes a difference, because it still leaves your options open as a PhD student. So I think I didn't make many connections when I was doing my PhD. And I think that would have given me a much wider focus on the industry and a much bigger understanding of what the industry was all about. And the second thing, I continued into my PhD from my undergraduate degree and basically went straight to the same university. And I think I probably would choose a different university. And I'll come back to why I choose a different university a bit later. But look at what the highs were. I mean, it was great fun. I loved it. I really loved doing a PhD. Great colleagues. I was in a room of 6 or 7 other PhD students, and we were all doing different things, and we just had a lot of fun, still in contact with some of those colleagues, not all of them. That discovery and freedom was fantastic. I loved it. I loved being out in the library and reading and finding out things and just basically nosying around the place, which was great. I did some lecturing at the time, which I also started to do which gave me some experience. The lifestyle proved to be really good. But one of the highs that came through during my PhD was the conferences. I started going to conferences quite early on, and I think that made such a difference to what I knew about the research industry and what I knew about being an academic. The lows, sometimes you got no money. Everyone who's done a PhD would know about that. That's can be a considerable low. The envy of others, I think for me it was all my colleagues who had done civil engineering degrees. Some of them were doing some really cool stuff. They were working around the world, they were working in other places, they were just generally doing some really cool buildings. And I kind of missed that because I kind of thought, oh, maybe I should have done a couple of years doing the great OE work in Indonesia or Hong Kong or France, where these people were. A lot of them were in the UK, but many of them headed overseas. So there was an alternative lifestyle that I could imagine at the time that I wasn't having. However, I was still having a great time doing a PhD. But I think one of the big loads which you'd understand as PhD students, if you do a PhD or doing a research degree, is around the confusion, the hard slog, the will I ever finish? So that always, I think, is embedded in the whole process of a PhD because it just takes time. And you think 3 years is quite a long time, and a lot of them go beyond 3 years. This is what my PhD was in. So it's kind of like, it actually was in women in civil engineering. There was nothing to do with disaster management at all. I did a PhD which looked at choices made by women civil engineers leaving higher education. And at the time, there were 362 women civil engineers in the whole country leaving education that year. So I learned a lot of things around employment law. I learned loads of social science methodologies around case studies and questionnaires, statistics. I had 6 months in the US while I was doing my PhD, which was great. I looked at international comparison, did a lot around diversity and inclusion, and looked at the whole structure of the industry and how it was working and who did what and where they went and why they chose to do what they wanted to do. So it was great for kind of really understanding how the industry works and how human resources in the industry worked. But I think I mostly learned about the process of research because I was in a shared office and they were doing geotechnical structures, computer science. I think I mostly learned from my peers about this, what are they doing, how are they doing it, having fun, understanding those sorts of things. And I had 3 supervisors. So I had a psychology supervisor, a supervisor in architecture, and a supervisor in civil engineering. And that gave me a really broad kind of canvas to work with. And they didn't agree at all amongst themselves. So it was kind of quite a confusing time, but that was good because it meant I took courses in psychology, I took courses in structures and architecture, and I did some lecturing in basic construction management at the time. So it was a really good time for me, and I really enjoyed and really appreciated being at Oxford Brookes. And Oxford Brookes at the time were really gearing up their research, so they were really putting energy into their PhD students. So we were being sent to conferences and basically given like a really good education. I felt I came out of a really good education. But I think the reason why I might have changed universities was because of this. The construction management research in the 1990s in the UK was basically dominated by 3 institutions, mainly. I mean, there were scatterings elsewhere, but you either needed to be in Reading, Salford and Loughborough. And I noticed that if you were in those organisations, in those universities, you would probably get jobs because the interchange of people between those, it was quite an obvious move. People would move between these institutions, or the PhD students would get jobs in one or other of those institutions. And it was pretty much led by a very small number of academics. And this is a list of academics. And in the red, I went and chased them down because having left the UK a long time ago, I don't really kind of keep in touch with all of them. but I did with some of them. But you'll see they really still seem to have stayed in Loughborough and Reading. Certainly the people that I knew well, and Martin Skidmore in particular was at Salford, but moved across to QUT and lived and still is now at Bond. But my supervisor, one of my supervisors, just encouraged me to go to these leading institutions. And so occasionally I'd go to their seminars, very close to Reading. And Will Hughes in particular was just extremely helpful with new PhD students. And there's lots of others. I can't remember everybody, but these were people that I kind of was trying to remember at the time who were helpful or who were giving advice to young PhD students. I thought that was really, really excellent, a very nice group of people. So if you know about ARCOM, this is what ARCOM looked like in the 1990s. So if you ever go to ARCOM now, it's a slick, well-organized, big conference, limits the number of papers that it takes, but basically everyone wants to go to ARCOM. It's now a big international conference. But in the 1990s, it was a small bunch of people. And you'll see in this photo, I managed to track this photo down from an ARCOM newsletter of 1994. Now, there's only one woman in this photo, but I was actually at this conference. But that woman there with the red circle is not me. I think it's Helen Lingard. But I was at this conference, and I think we were the only two women at the conference. I certainly don't recall any more. However, the conference wasn't huge. This was the conference, and you'll see Martin Skidmore's number 2 on the right. But I can't quite put names to everybody; it's a bit blurred there. So I went to the Isle of Man conference, the 8th annual ARCOM conference, and then I went to the Oxford one, which is where this conference picture was taken. And I can't kind of stress the value of conferences in your early stages. As a researcher, you don't really know much, and so you go to these conferences, and you're a bit overwhelmed by everything going on. But you really pick up some great ideas and some great tips, and see what's current, and all those kinds of great things that makes you more of a rounded researcher. To time traveling. So at the end of the 90s, the end of my PhD in 94, we decided we didn't want to be in Oxford anymore. We could have been in Oxford for the rest of our lives because both of us were being offered jobs, but we wanted to go traveling. And I think that was kind of a common thing for people in their late 20s. In fact, I've got 3 children and they've all gone traveling. So post-COVID build-up of need to travel. I understand that because I did that in 1994. And it was supposed to be a short trip. It was supposed to be go to New Zealand for 3 years. Let's have a look around New Zealand, Australia. And then let's just come back to the UK and we'll kind of, I think we would restart our lives in the UK. So, we'd probably go back somewhere in and around Oxford, and maybe I could get a job at Reading, maybe I could get a job kind of locally around there, maybe London. But it certainly was supposed to be a short trip. But I ended up, first of all, here, which is what was called Carrington Polytechnic, but it's now Unitec, for 2 years as a researcher. And then an opening came here, which is the University of Auckland. And I just stayed there. I just thought, this is a cool place to be. Really enjoyed my time at the University of Auckland. And I just stayed there for years and years and years and didn't leave. There's another reason why I didn't leave, which I'll come up to. And then more recently, in 2019, I moved to Massey because it was a brand new school being built, and a brand new school, lots of energy, lots of new young people coming in. So I thought there's an opportunity to help build a new school, which I've really enjoyed. I think after being so long at the University of Auckland, I knew where all the bugs were. I actually could go to work with my slippers on. That's what it felt like. It felt like I really knew my job so well that there wasn't anything new that was challenging me. Whereas I've moved into Massey, I've been, definitely found that I've had more challenges in the last few years than I had probably in quite a number of years previously. What else can I say? Going back to research. So first independent research was in 1994. So just finished my PhD. And Unitec were not interested in women in engineering at all. So the message was, we'd quite like you to be a researcher here. We'll give you a position. Unitec were trying to become a university, so they needed to have a lot of PhD people there. So they hired in a whole load of people with PhDs, didn't quite know what to do with us. And so they just said, well, we'll just give you lots of projects. So my project was procurement and life cycle costing in New Zealand. And so you can see I suddenly switched because that's what I was, being asked to do. So I think if I'd thought about it at the time, I would have carried on publishing published my PhD more widely. And the reason was I think I left a lot of my PhD, it just didn't get published. It got published in conferences, it didn't get the wider audience, and the subject area became really more and more popular as I moved away from it. And so I only really published one paper and then went into lecturing and was working more mainstream construction management. And I think I'd also get more training. Oh.
Looks like we have lost Professor Wilkinson. I think she would join in. Well, let's give a few minutes. Oh, there you are. Suzanne, you're on mute.
Sorry, my internet just went off completely. So I'm not sure really what happened there. I can restart where I was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no worries.
It just went black. My screen just went blank, and I was like, "Oh no, what's happened here?" Oh. So can everyone see that?
Not yet, no.
Okay, I'll back onto Zoom and share screen. The screen to share. Apologies about this. Let me have a look what's happened here. So am I back on now?
Yeah, it's coming up. No.
Am I back on?
I think so.
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Okay, sorry about that. My screen just went black, and I was just like, "Oh, that's really hard." So, right, I'm coming back. So where I was, so I should start from where I was. Yeah, you're happy for me to kick off again? So just talking about the first independent research, and it was in a place called Unitec, and at the time they were trying to be a university. And I was asked to do some lecturing there, and I was just thrown into construction contracts and project management. in first year classes. And I really found that absolutely terrifying. So I think the other thing I'd really encourage people to do would be to get some more training or get training to make sure that you really do know how to go into how to lecture, how to do these kinds of things. But I think just know the fundamentals of your discipline. So obviously this is not all the fundamentals of the discipline, but just know the basics of what's going on in your discipline, in the wider construction management discipline. Because even though you might be teaching a niche area, you still need to have that overview of how do your things connect to what's going on. Spend some time talking to construction employers, construction managers, people on site to really get a sense of how your discipline connects. I think there's much more activity now than there was at the time around doing work with industry and working and understanding more broadly. In terms of the barriers for women, I think they still remained. Certainly in the 1990s, they were getting better, and I think we were beginning to see more women going into engineering, more of a drive for women going into construction. Access and encouragement, I think the schools were starting to do a bit more. And certainly around this time, I did a lot of work with schools. So I would go into schools, talk about construction, talk about civil engineering. I think there was some discrimination in the workplace. You quite often see reports around unequal pay, lack of support, mobility within the sector. And also, I think we still lacked role models. So there's still very few. I was the first woman civil engineer to be employed at the University of Auckland in their civil engineering department. We had a few more come after me, still not great numbers. So I think there was still this lack of where's all the people that I can get some advice from. And things were starting to get better, and I think they gradually got better because we got more aware that we needed to do something. And so we did a lot, certainly at the university, a lot to promote engineering more broadly and civil engineering particularly. So we did have teams that would work with schools and work with junior staff to improve the role of women. There were lots of initiatives going on at the time around STEM. There was also beginning to see some networks. So this is the first time NAWEC, which is the National Association of Women in Construction, it was just starting to be convened in New Zealand. And so the professional development opportunities and networks that were just starting up. There were still few women in leadership roles and so few staff. None of them were in leadership positions. And I think a lot of women academics were getting themselves into service roles. And I think that was one of the things that happened quite frequently. Less so now, but certainly at the time I saw other women in other faculties, they were doing a lot of the service roles and weren't really talking about their research. So I think there was quite a divide at the time, but it gradually got better as we kind of shone a light on the things that were happening around, leadership, promotion. I think the universities took quite a lead in that. So for me, 97 to 2002, I think it was all about learning the subject. So I did some work on life cycle costing, did some work on looking at architecture and engineering education, and the lecturing got better and better as you get more and more used to it. And I wrote a textbook, but really for my own benefit, which was really my notes. But it seemed that lots of other people wanted copies of my notes. So a colleague and I turned it into a textbook. So we wrote a textbook this textbook in 2003. It was repeated in 2010. So this is the front cover of the second edition. And we're just coming out with a third edition. So there's obviously still a need for a basic textbook for people who can just go and go, oh, that's what it's about. So, and this is written very much with that, with me in mind. What did I want to know at the time? And what didn't I know? And going out and researching that. So my colleague and I, Roseby, who was in architecture, we teamed up and we've just finished our third edition. So I've got to give a shout out to CIB, since this is a CIB organised conference, organised seminar. The good thing about CIB is this international focus. Remember I said about ARCOM, but it was very much a UK-based organisation. We had a similar one. We have a similar one here called Orbia, which is really kind of regional construction management and education. But CIB, for me, opened a completely different world. So I've attended these 5 CIB conferences, but I've had papers in many other conferences and events. So the sideline events that if they've been regional, then I've tended to go to them. And yes, I'm hoping to come to the 2025 Purdue one. So I've got my ideas for papers and things and on the scientific committee. So thank you very much, Mark, for inviting me. But shout out for CIB for me as a young member. So I've been part of an institutional membership since 1994, and that was Unitec. So Unitec were really forward thinking in terms of their connections. They had a good person there who was really outward looking, really wanted to make Unitec a great institution for construction management. And so CIB was one of those vehicles that it joined and made us all join and participate in. So what does it give you? It gives you those international networks. Colleagues internationally. I still work with people I've met at the first CIB conference. A quick what's what, who's who, who's doing what, and all those big topics and big picture thinkers. That the website gives you access to all these people. And more recently, we did a tour of the UK with our research project, and we looked on CIB to see, okay, who's where. Right, well, we want to go to Leeds. We wanted to go to Leeds Beckett. Okay, we'll contact Mohammed there. We want to go to Wolverhampton. Okay, we'll contact the person there in Wolverhampton. We wanted to go to London. So who's in CIB, and who's been in CIB, and where are they, and what are they doing? So this is a great way for a quick hit on what's going on in your area, and you just get so many curious people working. So that's kind of a great place to look at these who's doing what, and work with those really curious people. But I had complicated my life completely by 2001 because I had 3 children by then, and that just totally and utterly complicates life. But I wouldn't have it any other way because they're amazing, as every mother would say about their children. But it does mean a halt or a slowdown or a rethink about your career. So for me, it was work-life balance, impossible with toddlers to really accelerate your career. Hats off to anybody who can do it. I barely kept alive, let alone keep a career going. Childcare at the time wasn't great. It was very, very expensive. Luckily, we could afford it because we had 2 incomes, but would have no idea how you would do it if you didn't have 2 incomes. Career progression slowed. I think it definitely slowed at the time because I couldn't do the travel, I couldn't do the connections. There's a lot of things I didn't want to do because I wanted to be home with the children. It was a conscious choice. And I think there wasn't much support because people just didn't understand that women wanted to work and have children. And it's not, and they didn't necessarily want to take big breaks. I did take 6 months off with each child, and each time I felt that that was enough to, if I took any more time off, I would start losing currency within the organisation. But so I didn't take more than 6 months off. And I saw a reduction in opportunities, so people didn't really kind of ask me to do things, especially around the research space. Satisfaction, I really was on autopilot teaching. I think you just got to recognize that you can only do as much as you can do. And if you've been up all night with sick toddlers and you've got an 8 o'clock in the morning lecture, you're not going to be your best. And there was a lot of juggling. And for me, it was colleagues who, not in my own faculty, because there were so few of us with children, there were more in other faculties. So I made friends with women in arts, women in science, women in law, women in health, and they became my cohort because they all had children, and their children were going to the creche. So I met them regularly, and we talked about how to survive, and we just created this cohort of people who would support each other, and that was absolutely fabulous. So I kind of saw, the world saw me like this. So this is one of my meetings where I would go to, and this is actually a trip I did do to Korea. Basically, I felt like this most of the time, just totally and utterly, what on earth is going on, and completely frazzled. And that lasted, I think, for quite a while. And so for me, it meant a conscious decision to focus on family, to make sure I had enough friends. I had no family other than my immediate husband and children in New Zealand. So friends became very, very important, a good friends network, and research. So teaching I could do, and I didn't need to I didn't feel I needed to get teaching awards and do fabulously at teaching. I think I was just okay at it. So I was happy to let that continue as it was, but I wanted to keep my research career going. And in 2003, a new opportunity came up. Now, this was really interesting because it wasn't something I was going to do. What happened here was I was in a lift, and I knew that there was this big meeting going on about a big funding body, and they wanted to look at disaster recovery. And I was in a lift, and somebody in the lift said, "You need to come to this meeting." And I said, no, it's not for me. I'm going home. I've got other things to do. No, you definitely need to come to this meeting because you're the only person with construction management experience. And we need somebody who might be able to do that in a disaster environment. I went, oh yeah, well, that sounds quite interesting, actually. I'll come along. And that set me on a completely different path. Up till that point, I'd been doing procurement, contracts, construction management more generally, looking at the role of the industry and the changes in the industry. And suddenly I was in a leading part in a 5-year multi-party, multi-institution, government-funded project, looking at construction industry, the role of the construction industry and disaster recovery. And so it was just fabulous. It was just the most interesting research that I'd got into, and it was useful, and it was people were listening to us. There were interesting topics, and there was a lot of security around having a 5-year funded project because it meant that other things you could kind of let go. So I could buy out of my teaching, for instance. And also my youngest child was only 2 at the time. So it gave me 5 years of security where no one was going to get rid of me because there was so much money coming in. So I was kind of felt quite protected then. A great time for me. And 2003, since 2003, that's really what I've been spending my time doing, which is why there's all those papers on the Google Scholar, all on this disaster recovery, but all about construction and how construction works in a disaster environment. So even though we're looking at climate adaptation, we're looking at it with a view to looking at how does infrastructure get affected? What does the building industry contribute to climate adaptation? How do we build smart cities? It's all about the construction side for me, about the industry and what does it do? And how is the industry affected by shocks and stresses, which is really the more recent work that we've been looking at. And so some of the common things we're doing, here's one looking at collaboration and communication, and who does what, and when's communication needed, and how are the structures set up. Here's one that we're doing around some engineering maps and flood hazards and climate change impacts. So some modelling. These were 2 of my colleagues here, Widi and Mohammed. And here's one that we've just been doing, just finishing off with Azin, a PhD, around vulnerability of tourists to tsunamis. So looking in particular at tsunami evacuation routes, looking at what types of structures need to be built in order to protect the population of Napier from a tsunami, and what kinds of warning systems do they need, and how do they need to how do you build those? And these are other kinds of things that we've been working on recently around some recent papers. Mark mentioned our 2019 book, but we've also been working on carbon emissions for buildings and cyclone-resistant housing in Fiji. So a whole range of areas around climate, disasters, disaster recovery, trying to make the world better. And I think we've gradually seen a lot more improvements in women in engineering and construction. So I don't think we're seen as odd or different anymore. I think in the 80s we were. I think the options are similar, and encouragement and choices to go into engineering has definitely improved. There's much more support within the workplace and more women in leadership positions more visible. And I think that's really made a difference to younger women coming through and other staff members coming through the lecturing positions, because they can see a whole variety of people that they wouldn't have seen 20 years ago. It would have been very different. I think there's a value of diversity now that in all workplaces that wasn't there before, and flexibility in the workplace. So there's much more flexibility and acceptance around, for instance, having children and working. Some of the issues that I still see are, in particular, women not supporting women. I think there's a need for these kinds of groups to come together and to talk about issues that they may be facing. Maybe cultural groups coming together, or different diverse groups coming together and just talking about some of these issues. There's still a big pay gap in New Zealand, which drives me nuts. So it's 10% difference still for women in engineering and construction. And there's different expectations after having children. So there's an expectation that you will slow down, but I don't necessarily think that is the case now. I think that families operate in multiple ways, and there's a lot more acceptance of how families are going to operate in different ways. And with the flexible working, you don't need to have those different expectations. I don't think I think they exist, but they're not real. I think that the equivalence of the work is obvious. The best part of my job is really now is supervising PhD students. So all these people are my PhD students, and some of them are professors now. So Kirill, James and Temi are all professors, and some of them are heading really exciting projects. Mustafa and Alice are both really excellent for that. They're in industry. They're basically industry leaders. And as in my student down on the right-hand side with my colleague Mustafa, just amazing student, seems to win every prize and every certificate and every cup going. So, and she's now heading some work for our regional council and doing some really great stuff. So that's the best part of the job by far, the fact that I've created from a family of me and my partner and our 3 kids. I have a huge family now, and they're all over the world, and they're all around the place. And that is such a pleasure. And what's important is how my work and the work of the team affects and improves society. So we now do more contributing to public debates. I think getting into public debates and putting your work out there, it comes with risks, but it also comes with advantages. And it's really good to see when a layperson reads your piece of work and comes back and says, hey, I've got something to tell you, or I want to connect, or I want to have coffee. And it just gives you a real kind of buzz that somebody is looking and listening and using your work. So our work has got into policy, we've done consulting, and then we put out these kind of 800 words through the conversation primarily, or through our local building magazines. And the worldwide career. So one of the big pleasures is the interactions that you have. And these are just recent interactions that we've had with people either collaborating or inquiries about collaborating, and that's been amazing. So I just plotted those. I think this is the last 6 months, and I thought I'll plot them on to see where and how we're doing things with people. And it's really good. We've got a worldwide reach, and I think academics can have that reach, and it's, well, our lives are richer for it. Other big thing for me is how I support and mentor other staff. So I do a lot of mentoring now, spend a lot of time talking to younger staff, encouraging them, working out how to, talking to them about their careers, what are they wanting to do, structuring, helping them structure things out. And that's a real pleasure. And the world turns. So I recently went back to this year to the UK, found it didn't do civil engineering, but it does disaster management. So I feel like, well, isn't that a real coincidence? So I think that's the end of my talk, Mark.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was wonderful. Walking with you through your journey of life in academia. That was really interesting. Thank you very much for that. Let me open it for questions. I'm sure from our audience they must be wanting to ask questions. So please open your mic and go ahead. I cannot see everybody on my screen, but if you have a question, please go ahead. Well, while people are thinking about questions to ask, let me jump in with my question. So you mentioned about the changes that have happened in the past years and what you have seen through your career, and so based on your experience, what would you suggest universities need to do or workplaces need to do to attract more women talent in, whether that be in academia or in industry?
So part of the answer, I think, is around the entry into construction and engineering. I think the numbers are pretty good. But what seems to be happening is as they get into a career, they're starting to be lost in that career, and they leave construction and engineering. And I think the bigger thing is, how do we keep them women on a track within construction? What's the attrition rate? If there's a problem there, how do we address it? And the second thing, like for me, was I went on the Women in Leadership program, and that was really, really useful. So to actually do some proper thinking about your career and how it might develop, I think those kinds of training programs are really useful. And it's about creating a culture that people want to belong to. If the workplace is unwelcoming, then why would you want to be there? There's other options. So it's about creating a kind of workplace that is welcoming and that has diversity.
Great. Arka, you have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Wilkinson. That was a great presentation. So as you mentioned, you have been part of the disaster research for almost 20 years now. So I am also graduating from Purdue and my research also looked at disaster recovery and disaster response mitigation as well. So I wanted to know about your opinion about where this particular field of research going in the future, because all the different universities in different continents and as well as countries are looking at this problem. So what's your opinion on that? Thank you.
So a couple of things, I think. One is to keep your core. So do you have a construction or engineering background?
Yes.
So I think the strength I see is to have a core that you relate that core to other disciplines, and you become much more broadly marketable as a person in terms of getting a career. So if you can go into construction, into a construction or an engineering faculty, if you want to be an engineer, if you want to be an academic, that's an option. That's a wide option for you, because almost all of the universities are interested in climate, disaster response, big world problems, global issues. and they're gradually morphing to being much more holistic in the way that they do engineering. So there's a core engineering that you can contribute to, or core construction discipline that you can contribute to, but you're also part of the future thinking. And I think there's positions that are coming up around that future, around that multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary work that you would be right at the front of. And so to look for those forward-thinking universities that have that, where they're consciously developing disaster recovery, climate, zero carbon work, and I think a lot of them are doing that now.
Great, thank you, Arka, for that question. Do you have any follow-up on that, or?
No, I'm good, thank you. That was
Okay,
a great response. Thank you.
Anybody else wants to go next? Well, so then just to follow up on what Arka was talking about, he's doing work in the role of insurance companies in disaster mitigation and disaster support. So he has done some work related to that. But you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your research, recent work about shocks and stresses to improve resilience of communities, or how to identify shocks and stresses that would influence resilience of communities. Could you expand on that? I know we have discussed that bit, but I think that's a very fascinating piece of work that you've done.
Yeah, so the piece of work is currently looking at how what are all the types of shocks and stresses that we have. So we're not just looking now at the standard ones like earthquakes and flooding and tsunamis, those kinds of things. We're now looking more broadly at what's affecting the sector. So financial, political, technological, any disruption that affects the sector, to work with the sector to try and make it more resilient. So understanding what did they do in the global crisis, for instance, financial global crisis. How similar is that to what they did in COVID? Or how similar is that to what they would do if they had an event that affected their business, power outage for 2 or 3 weeks? And so we're looking at the shocks that to an organization, plus we're looking at the stresses. We're trying to understand what are the commonalities between those in order to start building resilience around those issues, those common features. Because what we find is when there's a disaster, the kind of rules get rewritten each time, and everybody kind of scrambles to kind of get into trying to understand what are they supposed to do. The construction industry go, hey, well, we're going to be rebuilding, but they don't really know what that means, or how to do it, or what the complications are around that. And so we're trying to build knowledge and resilience in the system so that they will go, we understand, we've been through this before, we know what the commonalities are, we can now use that knowledge to improve how we recover from events. So that's where we are with that piece of work.
Okay, no, that's great. I thought that was quite a fascinating piece of work, because of course that leads into how to build capacities, and in what different sectors do we need to build capacities to improve the resilience as well.
Yeah, correct.
Let me see. Did please raise your hand, the virtual hand, and so your window pops up right in the first place. So I know you have a question. Well, I have a follow-up question. So, your talk was about your life and journey through academia, being a women researcher. So now fast forwarding to 2023, there's a lot of emphasis on work-life balance and so on. Have you seen that affecting academia, and in a positive way, or also industry in New Zealand, where the issues that you had mentioned are being addressed so that there's equal opportunity for everybody?
Yeah, I think the good thing that I've seen is the flexible working policies. that institutions now have. That creates a kind of culture that you don't have to be 9 to 5, that you can work at different times. The off-site working as well, so the work from home, I think that's really, really useful. It's not for everybody, but I think that flexibility has created more opportunities, I think, to keep your research and your work going when you're trying to balance other things. I mean, it's not just children, it's kind of elderly parents with kind of colleagues dealing with sick relations, elderly parents. Everyone has these things that happen in their lives. They're usually temporary. And we ought to accept that during that temporary time, they may not be as productive, but they're going to be more productive later because they're going to be so happy that you've supported them. So people want to do their best on the whole. And sometimes you can't do your best because your external circumstances affect that. And we need to just accept that everybody's life has, when you see mine, it has ups and downs and, changes of direction and all those kinds of things. It's just an ordinary life. And I think everybody has that. So to know that your colleagues that are going through some things that they need support for at times, and they'll pay that back in dividends, because when you need support, they'll be there. And I think that's a real shift, I think, from the early days, like the 80s and 90s, when it was very much a 9 to 5 or, a kind of boxed in approach to work. I think the flexibility, the work-life balance, the career breaks, they're not affecting careers as much as the career breaks are not affecting careers as much as an acceptance of them.
Yeah, we have made some structural changes in that regard also at Purdue, and that has really been quite good approach. But in terms of research funding, have you seen any shortfall for women researchers in acquiring research funding in New Zealand or other parts of the world where you have been?
Yeah, I think I've read things, and I think that there's a bit of a problem there, I think, with women leading major grants. I still think there's a kind of they're less likely to win major grants, and I don't know why that is, but I haven't got an answer for it. I just think it's something to watch and to think about and to analyze and to bring up and say, is this a structural thing? Is there some inherent discrimination in a system? Or is it just that we don't have enough women bidding? I mean, we're certainly doing a lot of work at Massey to get the women staff bidding for grants and running grants. And I've had, in my role as Associate Dean, is part of that, is to kind of say, this grant is one that you should be going for. And it's similar with promotions. We know that women only go for promotion when they're absolutely ready, whereas my male colleagues, and I see this all the time, they will still go for a promotion when they're not ready, and they'll just chance it, but they'll get the feedback and they'll get the recognition that they're ambitious and forward thinking. And so it's about saying to women staff, put your application in, put it in early, get that feedback, get that recognition that you're ambitious. You'll probably get it the following year then. You might not get it the following year if you're waiting till you're absolutely perfect. So you could miss another year. So these are the kinds of conversations that we have. And women, some people, women and men, they might go, well, actually, I'm not going to take that advice. I'm still really cautious and I need all the boxes ticked. Fine. But that's okay. But we do notice that there is a difference there, and that we can do something about it by providing that encouragement and support.
So we have a number of women researchers in the audience today. So, please, if you have any questions, please raise your hand or just open your mic and go ahead and ask the question. And while you're thinking, let me ask, okay, so Majid, go ahead, please. I'll hold my question. Go ahead.
Hi, that's a great presentation. I have a personal question. So if you were to go back in time, would you choose a different career path, like going to the industry, or would you even consider going to a different specialty other than civil engineering?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I think about, reasonably often. There were forks in the road, and I could have taken any different fork, and I think I would have been happy with a different career. So I think I would have been happy with a civil engineering career, and certainly the colleagues who did civil engineering, the two women who did civil engineering with me, one of them is very senior in a engineering company in the UK and doing very well and really loves the role, and has had to again struggle through different things, through children and changing jobs and changing careers. But when I look at her and I think, oh, she's got a great life, I think, well, I also have a great life. So it's kind of hard to know, right? You kind of take a pathway and you hope for the best. I wish I'd built a skyscraper. That would have been cool. It would have been cool to be able to say, look, I built that building. That would have been pretty cool. But then what's the sacrifice I would have had to make to do that would have been pretty huge, I think. I wouldn't have come to New Zealand if I was going to build in London, for instance. I would have had a very different life. So, you can always pose these questions to yourself. I mean, overall, it's been a fantastic career. It's great to be in the university. I've seen lots of changes. I'm very happy where I am at the moment. And Massey University is a good place to be. We're going through changes like a lot of other institutions, but generally got great colleagues, very energetic, young group of people that I work with, keep me on my toes. And yes, and I can see myself continuing for, quite a while still. So it probably doesn't quite answer your question, but I think if someone said, flip a coin or someone said you can choose to change your life, I wouldn't change it now. I would have done the same thing now. But there were certainly times, I think, during my career when I thought I probably should be doing something different.
Thank you, Majid, for that question. We're almost running out of time. So if somebody has a pressing question, Rovini, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's an amazing presentation and very inspiring. Particularly, I'm a mid-career academic. I'm from RMIT University in Melbourne. So you raised a very important point there that underrepresentation of women leading major grants. So do you have any advice to professional bodies like CIB having a central role in this sort of canvas of linking all the parties together, stakeholders together? Do you think CIB has a role in there to develop leadership programs or some kind of a strategic activity in that space?
Well, the short answer would be yes. I think that would be a great thing for CIB to start working on, because I think you could support mid-career staff to go into, say, Horizon bids, or you could support them to be part of the Australian bidding system. The thing about I've used CIB members into my grants that I've put bids in as international advisors, and people have always been keen to be part of that. I think the wider question about encouraging women to bid, there's more of a wider question there about how do we ensure that women are bidding into those major grants and have the support and confidence of their colleagues to do that. And there's probably a bit of work to do in the institutions. Maybe RMIT is good, I don't know, but certainly I've seen some institutions never pay any attention to that. And we should be kind of bringing all our mid-career staff into positions where they can apply for major grants, and they're supported by the institutions to do that. So some of the things we've been doing at Massey more recently is putting grant writers with our staff members. So we're basically repairing them up with people who know the grant system and will be able to help them navigate the system. And we pay for these people to work alongside our academics. And we say, we think this is a grant, $1 million grant or a $10 million grant that you should be going for. Here's some support. And they will help you work out what you need, including what connections you might need to support you in writing that. And we're having some success in that. We're not having full success, but the bidding system's so weird anyway, but we're having at least some success in confidence building and having bids that can be used for multiple grants as well. So having a kind of base, this is what I do, this is what the bid is about, this is what the project is about. How do we put it to multiple places to maximize the chances of it being successful? So those are some of the things we're doing. It's not gendered, it's kind of to anybody who comes forward, and we're actively promoting that. But I've been encouraging women in particular to apply, because I had noticed that a lot were not applying or were second or third, on a bid, including myself. I've done that myself. I've been happy to sit back and be third on a bid that I would prefer somebody else to run. So I think it's just about knowing that you can do something about it.
Thank you,
very
Ravini.
much.
We have just about a minute. Anybody else has a pressing question? Please raise your hand or open your mic. All right. Well, as I always do, let me ask my last question then. And so, Suzanne, thank you again. This has been a very exciting and very wonderful presentation. And we really appreciate you taking time early in the morning for making this presentation. But you mentioned a number of mentors, really who's who, a list of who's who that you have had the advantage of having interacted with. Will Smith, Roger Flanagan, Martin Skidmore, and the list goes on. What would you advise young researchers, upcoming researchers, the role of mentoring and what they should do in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was kind of pretty critical to have mentors, and I don't think these people would have said that they were mentoring. I think they were just being nice and kind and interested in what I was doing. But I think it's more to the senior academics, that showing an interest in somebody's project and following through with how you're doing, or I saw that paper, actually makes such a difference to a younger staff member, because they feel that they're on the right track. Sometimes it can be very lonely, and as you know yourself, you follow up an idea for a while and you're on your own, and I think that when senior staff, and CIB is great for that, because it's an opportunity. They have lots and lots of different activities throughout the year, and it's an opportunity for senior staff to kind of give back and say, hey, I can help this person in my field who's doing this stuff and I'm really interested in. But it's also good for younger staff to see that there's people who are willing to help, and those people change. Like when Martin Skidmore moved to QUT, I was probably one of the first people to email him saying, great, you're over here, right, I'm coming over to QUT. And I spent a couple of sabbaticals, just parts of sabbaticals in QUT, just so that I could go and chat with him, because UK was obviously, and when I went back to the UK on trips, I would try and see people, but it wasn't always possible because it's a holiday and I'm trying to see family. But certainly, that kind of mentorship or giving back. And then as mentoring for younger people, just looking for those people in your field. It doesn't have to be in your institution. And you'll find people who are willing, and they may not be full professors. They may be associate professors that want to develop their international network, and you become part of that. And so you become part of their, cohort. And as you go through, that network, you'll start working with people. And I'm seeing that more with our Massey staff, who are quite junior, a lot of them. So they are making those connections and being encouraged to make those connections. And the mentoring spread more broadly. It's not, I've got a mentor and that mentor is helping me. It's much better to have a broader canvas of people to work with that you get different things from, different ideas from.
Thank you, Suzanne. That is a great piece of advice. And with that said, I want to thank you once more for taking time. And this has been really exciting with all the questions and the responses. You can see that this is quite a bit of interest to the audience. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to all those who are in the audience for staying with us throughout the seminar. And our series continues. Look forward to next week. And we are going to have Professor Ruvini Edirisinghe, she's in the audience today as well, is going to be one of our speakers next Friday. So please stay tuned, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. So thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.